Right, so welcome to the next part. In the first part, I talked about the concept of objects. I talked about the concept of object spy, synchronization, timeout, how the objects are added in the repository. So basically, we saw that when we record a test, the objects they get added in the repository. Right. Now that's not the only way in which you can add the objects in the repository. You can also add the objects manually inside the repository. So there are two ways for this. Fine. You can add the objects manually. Hold on, I'll tell you. I'll create a new test and I'll just name that test as module 8 underscore 2. Fine. So hold on, let the test create. Yeah, now if I open the object repository, in the beginning the repository would be blank. Fine. Now if you look at this carefully, the spy option is present at two locations. It's also there inside the repository. It's also inside the main window. Fine. So one spy option is here, one option is out here. And if you spy, and suppose if I open up any web page, for example, I open up ebay.com. So you will see that there is a text field and there is a search button. You can enter something in the text field and search. Right. So if you look at the object spy, if you look at the text field in the object spy, hold on, it's a little hanged. You know what, at times this can hang on your machine as well. Fine. So when it hangs, don't be impatient, just hold on for some time. Right, it will resume back, it will come back. So yeah, you see that it comes back. Fine. Now again I go and spy the web page. I click on this web edit. So this is the edit box. Right, now you want this edit box to appear in the object repository. So you see this small icon over here, add objects to repository. Fine. You click on this and you'll see that the edit box will be added into the repository. Okay, so this is how you can add the objects from the object spy into the repository. Fine. Or else you see this button over here on the top, add objects to local. This button is present inside object repository. You can also add from this. I click on this button and I click on the search field. QTP will vanish when you click on that button. Right. So when you click on search, UFT will come back and you click on OK. So this search button also comes up. I'll name this as search button and I'll name this object as search box. Fine. So I have the objects ready in the object repository. One of the objects, that is search box, I added through spy. The other object I added through this green button. Fine. Now I can drag the objects into the code. I can drag them right like this. Fine. And the code will automatically be generated. Okay. Inside my object repository, I'll just give the browser a good name. I'll just name my browser as browser and I'll name my page as page. Fine. So I'll give just generic names. Inside the browser, inside the page, there is a web edit search box. Say I want to search books and then you click on the click button. The browser is opened behind the scenes in the right state in which the objects will be there. Okay. If I execute this code, this will run properly. You see that it searches for books. Fine. So you can add the objects inside the object repository manually and you can generate the code as well. Fine. When you make a new test, okay, when you go to file new test, okay, the old test repository will not be associated with the new test. Every test has got its own particular repository. Like this test has got this repository, I created it. Right. Now think of a situation. Fine. Think of a situation in which I have got multiple test cases. In practical world, we have got 1000 test cases, 2000 test cases, right? So think of a situation in which you have got multiple test cases, right? And inside each and every test, you will have a particular object repository. Every test will have its own object repository. right? And inside that particular object repository, suppose there is an object which is common for all the test cases. Hold on, what is happening? Right. Suppose there is an object which is there in every test case and it is common for all the test cases. For example, where there are 4 test cases and every test case requires you to log in inside the application. So then your login username, text field and the login button, they will be the common objects for all the test cases, right? Okay. So inside multiple test cases you can have common objects. Now this poses a threat, this poses a problem, because if tomorrow the developer he changes the object or the application changes, then you will have to open each and every test and change the object in the test. You can update the object, I'll tell you how you can update it, I'll tell you later on, but understand the fact that you have to update your object repository frequently. That is not a good thing. You have to update your test cases frequently. You should not write test cases which have to be updated with a very small change, right? So how do you manage this kind of situation? This kind of situation can be managed with the concept of shared repository. Okay, you have a repository at a central place and all the test cases, they read the objects from that particular repository. So this will be a centralized repository from which will contain all the objects of all the test cases, right? And the test cases can use the objects from this place. Okay, and this concept is known as shared repository. Right, the repository which is there in the local test case, it is known as the local repository. So every test case can have a local repository as well, but till now we have made local repositories. Okay, we can also make shared repositories. Okay, and I'm going to talk about this concept right now. Fine, so what I will do is I'll make a new test, I'll make a flow. Fine, I'll make a new test in which I'll make a flow. I'll just call it as flow 1. Look, I'm not doing testing over here. Fine, I'm not doing testing over here. I'm not doing showing you how to validate stuff, how to read the data from the application, how to write the data. No, I'm telling you the concepts of objects first. Right, now suppose the first flow is that I need to visit the website flipkart.com. Right, I need to go under electronics tab, there will be a mobiles link. I need to click on this mobiles, then say click on Samsung, and then I need to select say popularity over here. Fine, so this is my first flow. Right, so what I can do is that I can open up my repository. I made a new test, so I'll get a fresh repository. I can open up SPY and say firstly I need to click on mobiles over here. So what I'll do is with the help of SPY, look, the drop down is not coming. Fine, you hold the control button, SPY will be disabled, the drop menu will come up. You now release the SPY, release the control button, you'll have the mobiles link. Fine, you take this link, add it into the repository. So I've added the mobiles link inside the repository. Right, after this, on the next page I need to click on Samsung. Fine, so I go to my object repository again and I will add Samsung inside the object repository. You added Samsung. Now after adding Samsung, right, you go to the next page and you need to add this drop list so that you can select the value from the list. So you move the SPY and you add this list inside the repository, right? So the list also gets added, right? And this is the, I'll name it, I'll give it good name, drop list. Okay, so basically the first page was this page. This was my first page, page 1. Right, After that the other page opened up, mobile store, this was page 2, right? And after that the third page opened up, which was page 3. Fine. So I've got page 1 in which mobiles will be there. I'll be clicking on mobiles. Then page 2 will open up. I'll click on Samsung. Then page 3 will open up where I'll click on drop list. Alright, fine. And from the drop list I have to select popularity. So I'll just write over here, select popularity. Look, whatever you select from the list is case sensitive. If inside the list popularity is capital, P is capital, then you have to make sure that P is also capital over here. Please note this. Right. Now if I hold on, I'll record the flow of visiting this website as well. I'll just click on the record button. I'll open up Mozilla and go to the website flipkart.com. Fine, I'll record this much. Fine. I don't want this window. Hold on. I don't want this window in the report. Yeah. Okay. So this code should be actually over here. So what is there? This is a generic flow which goes to flipkart.com, goes till Samsung and selects popularity over there. Fine. Now if I open up object repository, the browser name is online browser shopping India, so I'll just name my browser as browser, simple name. Fine. Initially the page which comes up is this one, Mozilla Firefox start. You sync this page, the start page, then visit flipkart.com and then you carry forward. Fine. So if I run this flow, this will work. Okay. If I go over here, this goes inside Samsung and you see that in the end it has selected popularity. Right. So far so good, our code is successful. Fine. Now I can also do a modification inside this code. Right. You see, I have got multiple pages inside this code. Fine. Now practically when we make an object repository, like I have the habit, unnecessarily I don't create multiple pages until or unless it is very important for me. Fine. I can create a generic page. For example, this is the page Mozilla Firefox start. I'll name it as page itself. And I will drag drop all the objects under this. All the objects which were there in under the other pages, I will drag and drop them under this particular page. And I will delete all the other pages. These have no relevance now. So under the same page, a generic page, this is a generic page, I have kept all the objects. Right. And I can name, I need to correct this in code. This doesn't get updated automatically. So under a generic page, I am having different objects. You can do that. Although practically on the application, the pages will be different. Okay. But over here, I have taken a generic page and I have told UFT that the objects are under a generic page. You can give it any name. It's not necessary to give it a name page only. But this looks more clean until or unless you don't have to get the title of the page or something like that. It's not important to do this. Right. So when you run this will open Flipkart and this will also work. Fine. So I discussed one flow over here. Right. I'll store this flow. Flow 1, I've stored it. Now suppose there is another flow and I'll name it as flow 2. Now inside this flow, what I have to do is that I have to go to flipkart.com. Again I have to go to, under electronics I have to go to mobiles. Fine. And in mobiles I need to select Samsung. But in this particular flow, instead of selecting from this drop list, I want to check on this checkbox. Right. So what I can do is I can make my object repository again in this test. Fine. I can open up the object repository, the same steps which I repeated. I can add the objects and all in this repository. Right. the objects from the first flow, that is flow 1, which we had created, and the objects in the second flow would be the same, apart from the difference that in the first flow we had this drop list, right? In the second flow we will have this checkbox. Okay, so this means that our two test cases, these are the two test cases. The object repository inside the two test cases is something like this. A certain part of the object repository is common for both the test cases, right? Hold on, sorry. This is not the right diagram to represent. These are the two tests, right? Each test can have its own repository, but as I had talked about earlier, the certain objects in the repository are same, in both the repositories are same. So tomorrow if the objects change, for example, if this particular mobiles link change, then if it changes, right, then I'll have to modify it in flow 1 and flow 2 as well. Okay, so what we do is that we make a common repository, put all the objects in that and share it with both the flows, both the tests basically. Fine. So how do you make a common repository? Let me open up the flow 1 which I had stored. Right. Inside the repository of flow 1, okay, I can add one more object. I can add this object like I can add this checkbox and I will add it under this particular page itself. Fine. Right, so I have all the objects necessary in this particular repository. Although I don't need this web checkbox, although I don't need it, I have still added it. Fine, why have I added it? You'll come to know. What I'm going to do now is that I'm going to store this repository on my hard disk. And then I will import it in the other flow 2, in which I need it. So what I'll do is I have the option of going to File, Export Local Objects. This is a local repository. This is local to the test. I'll click on Export Local Objects and I'll save my object repository over here as say repository 1. Fine. If you go to your hard drive and look at it, it will be stored as repository 1.tsr, means test shared repository. Okay. If I open this in TextPad, right, you'll not be able to understand anything, so don't try to read this file. Right, now suppose this all the objects over here have been persisted into the hard drive. Right, now if I have my other test, which is the flow 2. Fine, if I have my other test flow 2, right, which has got its repository empty. Okay, this test has got its repository as empty. I can import the repository which was stored on the hard drive into this. I can select the option over here, this one, associate repositories. Okay, you click on this, you will see associate repository icon over here. You click on this add repository option and you select the tsr file which you have saved. Fine. Select action 1, drag it onto the right side, click on OK, and you will see the repository coming up over here in this test. You will not be able to modify this repository. This repository is a read-only repository. Shared repository is always read-only. Fine. What you can do is that you can make the test out of this by dragging and dropping the objects. First you can say click on the mobiles link, then what you can do is you can click on Samsung link, and then you can click on the web checkbox which you had recorded, that is this 2000 and below web checkbox. Fine. You can have the initial commands of opening the browser and navigating to the website also over here. Okay. The system util.run, hold on. You can record opening the browser. Just a minute, I'll close this one. I'll record opening the browser. So I've just recorded opening the browser, and if you go to the repository, fine, so you will have this line of opening the browser. After this you can write browser dot generic page dot sync, let the page open, then navigate the browser, that is browser dot navigate it to flipkart.com. After going to flipkart.com, you execute the flow of the second test. So this way you have this repository coming up from the other test, that is the flow 1. Fine. So diagrammatically what I did was, this was my first test and this was my second test. Inside the first test I made the repository. I saved that repository on the hard drive. That repository had all the objects and all, and I shared the repository under the second test. Similarly, I can share the same repository under the third test. Okay, now this is okay, right? This is fine, you can do this. Fine, but ideally we don't do like this. Fine, to make this object repository, right, what we do is that we use something known as object repository manager. Fine, what is object repository manager? I'll just talk about it. If you look at this object repository over here, for example, you cannot edit it. You cannot edit the repository, you see that? Fine. With the object repository manager, you can create new repositories and you can edit the repositories as well, right? If you go to over here, resources, object repository will open the normal repository of the test. If you go to the second option, object repository manager, it will be a new window. This window is just like the object repository window, but it is actually not associated with any test. Using this you can create object repositories, that you can create TSR files, you can edit the TSR files. Fine. For example, I write over here, I select file, open the file repository 1.tsr which we had created. Fine. And then I click on the small icon over here, enable editing, the pen sign over here, right? So I can edit my object repository over here. If you look at this, hold on, yeah, I'll just make the screen visible like this. For example, the browser is known as browser 1 in the repository, is known as browser. If I name it as my browser, okay, hit the enter button, automatically you will see in the code the name of the browser has changed, right? That means, right, this was my test case, this was the object repository. Now I have kept the object repository away from my test case, and using the object repository manager, which was over here, ORM, I edited the object repository and the change automatically got reflected in the test case. This is the advantage, because if you have got multiple test cases, the change will automatically get reflected on those test cases. Fine. In this scenario, right, we were in flow 2. If I open up my flow 1, inside which the same repository is there, right, you will see that it's not updated over here. Okay, you'll see that it's not updated over here because we had actually created the repository in a wrong way, right? We had actually exported it from the first flow 1 test and all. So I will just tell you how we practically do it. Fine. Whatever we have done so far, just remember that, and let us take an example of a practical scenario. Suppose we have the same flow with us. Okay, that is, you need to go to flipkart.com and you need to execute. First time you need to select from the drop list, second time you need to click on a checkbox on the right hand side. Suppose we have got two flows like this. So what we do is that initially in the beginning we finalize our object repository. Fine. We go to object repository manager. Fine. Inside this object repository manager, I start adding the objects of the application which I need. Right. For example, on flipkart.com, I need SPY is present in object repository manager as well. I need the mobiles object, so I'll add this inside the object repository. Right. Then after this, after you click on mobiles, hold on. Right. I need to get the Samsung object. Right. I need to add it into the repository. So if you look at your object repository manager, both the objects are added. Fine. After adding Samsung, I need to go to this page. In the first test, I require this list. In the second test, I require this checkbox. So using object repository manager, I will add both of them. I'll add this list and I will add this checkbox as well into the repository. Fine. And this browser, I'll give a generic name to it, browser, and I will keep a generic page over here like I did earlier. Fine. I'll move all the objects inside this generic page. Fine. Delete all the other pages. Okay. So I have the browser object, inside it I have all the pages and all, and I'll save this repository. I'll save this as repository2.tsr. Fine. And now I will start building my test cases. Okay, so you don't directly build your test cases first. You actually first finalize your object repository the way I have done. So what I have done is that diagrammatically I have created my object repository first. Okay, and added all the objects inside it. Fine. So now I'll build up my first flow. I'll go to file, new, test. Okay, I'll name it as flow 1, new flow underscore 1. Fine. And what I'll do is I'll open the object repository for this particular test. Fine. And I will add the associate the repository. I'll write over here associate repository 1.tsr into the action 1 of this test. Fine. Right. And I can drag drop the objects. In the flow 1, I first need to click on mobile, then I need to click on Samsung, then I need to click on drop list, and from the drop list I want to select popularity. Right. So this is my first flow. Okay. Now you go to file, open again, file, new again, and you can make another test. Right. You can add the lines for opening the browser and all in the beginning. It's completely up to you. So you can make a new test, new flow underscore 2. Looks like very simple, but be with me. Okay, you will learn few more things. Okay, so new flow 2, which you have created. Okay, and inside the action, inside the object repository, you can associate the repository 2.tsr. So both the tests have the same object repository. Okay, and you can select the objects which you want, mobiles, then Samsung, and then you need to click on the checkbox. Okay, right. Now Save this. If you open up flow 1, you have the same set of objects except the last line, right? Except the last line, which is different. Okay, now suppose I go to my object repository manager now. Fine. And I edit this repository from here. Okay, or suppose you have closed your object repository manager, you can open it again and load the object repository by going to file, open, and open up repository2.tsr, edit it. Now suppose this object name is not good over here. This is actually the popularity drop list. Fine, so you can name it as drop list select, something like this. Okay, so what will happen is that you can save it. As soon as you save it, and if you open your file recent, if you open flow 1, you will see that the name in this list has changed. Okay, so drop list select was the name. It's not coming up like this. Quite weird. It should not happen. Hold on. I type hello and it's not updating in the repository. It's quite weird. This kind of stuff never happens. Probably this is a defect or something in UFT, but in QTP 10 this used to work, right? The name used to get automatically updated over here. For example, if I change my browser name, okay, if I go to my object repository manager and open the repository 2, fine, and edit the name of the browser to browser 1, save it. Okay, it's not showing up. Let me load the test again. I'll close the action 1, load action 1, or if I load flow 2, see in flow 2 it's showing the updated name, and if I think you have to load the test again. In flow 1, when I load it, flow 1 is not updating it. Okay. Alright, hold on. Hope so I'm opening the right one. New flow 1. This is the shared object repository inside it. Oh, I had actually shared the wrong one. I'm sorry. I should be sharing repository2.tsr. I'm sorry. Fine, that's what I was wondering. This was my mistake. Fine. You should go and associate repository2.tsr in this. This was the new one. Repository2.tsr is the shared one. You see that this one has got the updated names. So that's what I was wondering, why this is not getting updated. Right, you can actually make the code again. I'm sorry for a little confusion. Mobiles, Samsung, and then you need to select from the hello drop list dot select. Fine. Now if I go to my object repository manager and I open up repository to edit it and change name to drop down, you see that automatically gets updated in the test. So you update the objects in the shared repository, the objects get updated in the test, and that's what you want, right? That's what you want. Fine.